Welcome to Intentional Now podcast. Dave, welcome back to the show, brother. It's great to have you here, man.
Absolutely, bro.
And I never asked you, do you like Dave or David? I don't even know.
Well, most people know me as David or Bull.
Okay. All right. So David or Bull. All right. Well, we're going to use Bull from now on for the rest of the podcast because I love Bull.
Whatever works, brother.
And I'm going to ask you more about the Bull thing. I think we asked last time, but people need to know. So let me, today on the podcast, we're honored to welcome back a true warrior, patriot, David Bull Gurfein, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, combat veteran, and CEO of United American Patriots, UAP. They're doing a tremendous job out there. David has been on the front lines, not just in combat zones, but in the fight to make sure the legacy of heroes like Major James Capers Jr. isn't forgotten or misrepresented. I had the honor of having Bull on the podcast last year to learn more about Bull. Please watch a previous podcast after this episode. We also spoke about Major James Capers, Vietnam Recon Marine, and I invited Bull back on the show to see the progress, how it's coming along with Major Capers to receive the Medal of Honor. In this episode, we dig deep into the complexities of military leadership, the real stories of Major Capers, and now more than ever, it's time for America to recognize those who have paved the way for courage, sacrifice, and grit. This isn't just a conversation, it's a mission to set the record straight. Let's get into it. Bull, so I've seen you on social media a lot talking about you've been hitting the pavement in Washington, D.C. to create awareness and support. So it seems like it's a long process to get this done, right? It's not just one signature. Can you share with the audience what is the process for the approval of the Medal of Honor?
That's a great question, and it's when you say it's a long process, we have to recognize that this is dating all the way back to 1967, and so the process should not be taking this long. As a matter of fact, by law, it's supposed to be wrapped up within 5 years from the action. And this is both a blessing if it works properly, or it becomes a nightmare when it goes beyond that 5 years. So in Capers' case, his commanding general, General Hockmuth, actually recognized his actions right after his heroic actions in Phu Loc, met with his Marines who were wounded and spoke with each of them and was overwhelmed with the stories they heard about Capers' heroism and selfless service, and met with Capers. And from eyewitnesses, they say that General Hockmuth actually kissed Capers on the forehead and said, "I've never heard of anything so heroic. We're going to make sure that you receive the Medal of Honor."
Wow.
Well, unfortunately, General Hockmuth ended up dying in a helicopter crash shortly thereafter. And this is where the nightmare begins, because since the paperwork was never followed through, that this never ended up gaining the traction as General Hockmuth intended, then what ended up happening was Capers, who was then shipped back to the States after being wounded, his officer in charge said, well, we should make sure that he gets an end of tour award. And the reality is this officer in charge had just arrived 3 days before the Battle of Phu Loc.
So he had no clue.
He was not at the Battle of Phu Loc, was unaware of Capers' heroism, and was unaware of General Hockmuth's intent to award Capers a Medal of Honor. So he thought he was doing the right thing. And he wrote an end of tour Bronze Star Medal for Valor, Bronze Star with B, and that's what Capers received. And that divergence right there started all of the nightmare. So it wasn't until many years later, when all of his actions and everything were brought to light, that all of a sudden all of his commanders got on board and said, yes, Capers is deserving of the Medal of Honor. I have right in front of me the actual documents with all their signatures pointing out their recommendation for Capers to receive the Medal of Honor. Even that officer in charge, who was Captain Mooney, that was his name, who gave the Bronze Star, when he found out about Capers' action, he signed a recommendation for the Medal of Honor.
Oh, wow.
And so
that part. Okay.
Most people don't, and that's the problem. People say, well, if his commander gave him the Bronze Star, who are we to say he deserves a Medal of Honor?
Right.
Right, exactly. And that's a great question. And what's really interesting, it's funny that people say that, because their argument against Capers getting the award is actually the reason he deserves the award. And General Jones, Congressman Jones, who was a congressman from North Carolina, he followed up and said, hey, what's going on with Capers? He deserves a Medal of Honor. And this is back in 2008. And he received a response from General Regner. And General Regner, who was in the Office of Legislative Affairs, he wrote very specifically that sorry about that.
No problem.
He wrote very specifically, and I'm going to read this verbatim because I think it's important. The entire chain of command endorsement is a key tenet of our military award process for both current and historical awards. Under Title 10, this action ensures that the commanders who led the Marines in combat had an opportunity to render their experienced judgment on what degree of award, if any, was appropriate. The commanders' endorsements are based on their knowledge of the actions in that specific combat theater and of the other Marines within their command. So this came before they had the endorsements. So those who were working on the awards said, fine, let's go get the endorsements, and had to go find these commanders that they hadn't talked to in decades. And every single one of them, every one of his commanders signed off on the document saying, yes, we're putting him in, we're recommending him for the Medal of Honor. So according to General Regner, Marine Corps General Office of Legislative Affairs, he said, this is the most important endorsement. And yet the bureaucrats felt otherwise. And so it's a contradiction right now, and it's frustrating. And so with these recommendations and the witness statements, that everybody who's seen the witness statements and compared them to other actions for similar actions at the time in Vietnam of Marines who rightfully received the Medal of Honor, Capers' actions meet and in some cases exceeded their heroic action. So there's no question his actions are deserving of the Medal of Honor. And so this is a whole bureaucratic nightmare of this situation. And so what ended up happening was eventually this all gets elevated to the awards branch at Headquarters Marine Corps. And the head of the awards branch, there's some question about, his involvement and what his perspective was on this whole thing. But for some reason, instead of it going to a Medal of Honor board, which it should have, because all the recommendations, everything said Medal of Honor, and it was elevated by General Williams, General Gaskins, General Stalder, and General Kolb. All of these generals said, look, this guy deserves a Medal of Honor. This bureaucrat decides we're going to put this in an upgrade award board. And we don't really even know if it was an award board or it was just he decided to assess this with a few other individuals. But they came back and said, yes, Capers' Bronze Star, his end of tour Bronze Star, should be upgraded, and we will now upgrade that to the Silver Star. Now, the question is, well, why? So if we give them the benefit of the doubt that, well, an end of tour award can only be upgraded to the Silver Star. Why? Because the Medal of Honor is not an end of tour award. So the highest it could have gone was a Silver Star. So let's assume they're trying to do the best they could.
Basically, yeah.
Exactly. So it went down this path where the best that could have happened was the Silver Star. And so even if these individuals that reviewed this said, wow, this guy's deserving of the Medal of Honor, well, we can't even talk about the Medal of Honor because it's not an end of tour award. Wow. So they gave him the Silver Star. It went to General Conway. General Conway said, what's the recommendation? Recommendation, Silver Star. General Conway, trusting his staff, as all good commanders do, and not wanting to influence his staff, accepts the recommendation, brings it up to Secretary of Navy, endorses recommendation, and Capers eventually is awarded the Silver Star.
Wow.
So again, you get congressional involvement and other people saying, what's going on here? This is not right. His actions are deserving. And it's our understanding that General Conway has since reviewed Capers' actions in detail, which he never had an opportunity to the first time, or if he did, did not have all the information that he should have, and has since said, yes, Capers deserves the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
So what that means is that the bureaucrats, again, per the system. Sorry, I don't know why we're having issues here. The bureaucrats, per the system, they keep saying, well, look, we can't even review this unless there's new information. Well, okay, well, what new information do you want? All the witnesses, pretty much all of them are dead. But you want us to go do a forensic analysis of the battlefield in Vietnam? Like, what more new information are you accepting or expecting? And the reality is that there is no new information necessary, because the information that we have says he deserves a Medal of Honor.
Wow.
And this is the challenge, is that the bureaucracy is like, nope, per the procedure, we can't do anything. Our hands are tied. We can't do anything. Okay, fine. Then we have to recognize that if the information says he deserves a Medal of Honor and he's not receiving the Medal of Honor, then that's a procedural error. And it's known as a material procedural error. That means, like you said, Dave, that it went down the wrong path, that it has to backtrack and go down the right path. So the right path would be, great, let's convene a Medal of Honor board. Let's review this. That would be the right answer, that it didn't get reviewed properly the first time. Here's the challenge. This has already been reviewed by so many officers, so many generals, and it was just one board that, for whatever reason, and they never gave an explanation. That's what's even worse, that they never said, well, this is why it's on. So if we put it to another board, how much longer is that going to take?
Right.
And how much longer is Major Capers going to stay alive?
How old is Major Capers now?
He's 87, almost 88.
88.
He just came out of the ICU.
Oh, wow.
He's a tough son of a bitch. And I joke with him, he's probably going to be around for maybe another 1 or 2 decades. But the reality is...
Yeah, but we never know at that age, right?
Well, exactly.
The thing that's crazy, Bull, is the initial general said he deserved it. And he actually talked to his team members, and they all said he deserved it. Exactly. So that, and obviously my opinion doesn't really matter, but in common sense, in my opinion, if that's the facts, what else do you need to look at, right? So, but
exactly, and that's where the bureaucrats are running the insane asylum right now, and that's the problem. Is that at a certain point, are you going to lead? Are you going to be a commander, or are you going to take the counsel of your fears and your JAG officers and these bureaucrats who are saying, oh, well, the rules are this? Well, the commander's responsibility is saying, I hear you, but something's wrong. And either you step up as a warrior, as a commander, you do the right thing regardless, or you placate these bureaucrats and you say, well, I can't do anything. It's embarrassing.
Yeah,
we see leaders of the most lethal war-fighting organization in the world unwilling to take chances, to take the necessary actions and force this through, not because we're trying to bypass the system, but because it's the right thing to do. And that's what Marines do. We fight for right, for honor, courage, commitment, semper fidelis. We're always faithful. We are the first to fight and do what has to be done. And it's frustrating when we have yet to see the Marine Corps and the Commandant of the Marine Corps step up and say, yes, Capers deserves a Medal of Honor. And guess what? He might get shot down for some bureaucratic reason, but I know for a fact General Conway has fought for Medal of Honor recipients before and has threatened individuals. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And that's what we expect from the leaders of warriors, is to be a warrior.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say the same exact thing, Bull. It's like, you know what? There's right and wrong, and we always have to do what's right. Forget all the politics, forget all this other BS stuff that's happening out there. Let's just get the mission done, right? Just like we're in the Corps, our focus is getting the mission done, no matter what it takes. Improvise and overcome. Let's make it happen. So I know Major Capers has been on different interviews. He was on with Hiram. He was on with Sean Ryan. He's really a hard charger.
We're on Fox News. We're on the Will Kane show. He's been on quite a few interviews.
So he's a hard charger, right? And he's sometimes really rough around the edges, which a lot of Marines could be rough, right? So some people may get offended by that.
That's a
Do you think
rumor.
that kind of comes into play with, you know, what some people are not wanting to move this forward? It's like, oh man, this guy's a little rough. Yeah, I don't know if we want to deal with him or not. Is that something that you think comes into play or should come into play?
So look, here's the thing. Our human frailties come into play whenever we assess a situation. There is, our own personal assessment, like, well, I didn't get mine. Why is he getting his?
Right.
Or there might be, you know, some prejudice, and not necessarily based on a racial prejudice, but there may be a prejudice towards the individual. Like, you know what? I don't think that they deserve it. I don't like that person.
Right.
There may be a million and one reasons. I heard a story that said he didn't, and I heard this, and there's all sorts of rumors going around out there. However, at the end of the day, I've run down just about every rumor that I've heard. And I've looked at all of the arguments people have made, and I've yet to find one substantial argument that suggests that Major Jim Capers does not deserve the Medal of Honor. All of the evidence, all of his commanders, everything that's been written supports him receiving the Medal of Honor, regardless of the rumors, the myths, the hatred, the disrespect, the jealousy, the insecurity, whatever it might be. Deal with your own issues. Capers
Right.
deserves the
Exactly.
Medal of Honor.
100%. Yeah. And I think, and if people have information either way, reach out to Bull, right? I'm sure
Oh yeah,
he'll be happy to have a conversation with you about what's going on. So, so Major Capers is a legend in the recon community, right? And can you talk a little bit about the mission that why he deserves the Medal of Honor, Bull?
yeah, absolutely. So I'll just turn this off so we don't get interrupted again. I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
So we had a an artist create some visual representation
Okay.
of the mission at Fulak, and we could talk through these. I think the illustrations help bring to life the situation that Capers was dealing with at the time.
Right. Yeah, I
So
think
let
it'd
me
be great for
see.
our audience to
Right.
what missions he went through. That'd be great.
Well, this is just one mission.
Specifically the Fulak run. Right, right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Can you see this, Dave?
Yes, yes, I can see it perfectly.
All right, great. So and that's a good point you bring up, Dave. Like, Capers was involved in multiple combat missions. Some have said over 50 combat missions, many of which were classified. And when originally they wanted to give him the Medal of Honor after General Hockmuth's attempt failed, that they tried making an end of tour award because they couldn't decide which one of all of his heroic missions were deserving. And they went with another mission once. It was a POW camp. And then they couldn't get enough witness statements because, again, not everybody's alive. So they finally came back to this Fulak mission. And, it must be nice to have multiple missions upon which you can be judged at the level of the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
So let's talk through this situation here. So Capers led a team. It was actually called Team Broad-Minded. It wasn't Team Broad-Mind, but he had been in Fulak with his Marines. He went out initially with 9 other Marines. It was at the end of March, and conducted multiple reconnaissance patrols. They were identifying avenues of attack up to a regimental headquarters of North Vietnamese, and was engaged with the enemy multiple times. He actually lost one of his Marines who was injured. He had to medevac out. But on the 4th day, when he was supposed to pull his Marines out because they had conducted their reconnaissance mission, he was then given the order to lead the attack. And, for those who are familiar with reconnaissance, well, when you've got an infantry battalion, that's their job, is to go and enforce that the reconnaissance Marines, they're supposed to, avoid contact, although in their case they were engaged multiple times and fought the enemy off. And Capers tried challenging that order. And what ended up happening was he was overruled. And it was like, hey, Marine, lead your freaking Marines back into the attack over the terrain that they had already been through, on which they knew the enemy was aware that they were in the area. And so without going in with overwhelming force, now they're facing potential for ambush. And that's exactly what happened. And so they were ambushed. And as they went in there, they were attacked. They had daisy chain claymore mines, which were shooting shrapnel all through them. Every single one of his Marines got injured. His dog, which we just saw in the previous image, King, that he ended up dying. He got taken out. But Capers credits his dog King with saving his life. Wow. And because he took the brunt of the blast. But Capers ended up getting his legs shredded, ended up having his abdomen tore up. However, he still stayed in the fight and he countered. And people who observed the witness statement said, he's calling in fire in his own position. He's calling in air, artillery, mortars, the whole 9 yards. And he suppressed the enemy as best he could. And then as he assessed the situation, as I said, King was killed. All of his Marines were critically wounded. And he had to figure out what to do next. And he turns to his assistant patrol leader, Sergeant Yerman, who fortunately I had an opportunity to meet and talk with before he passed away. And when I asked him, I said, look, you were with him at Fulak and all these other missions. I said, do you believe Capers was deserving of Medal of Honor? Sergeant Yerman says, no, sir. He's deserving of 2.
Wow.
And so, and this is a guy who fought alongside him his entire time. So Capers ends up telling Yerman, get our most severely wounded Marines out of here and bring them back to the LZ. And while that happened, he turns to the 2 Marines closest to him and says, follow me. And he then takes the attack to the enemy. And this overwhelming enemy force, he ends up taking the fight to them. And he's using grenades, machine guns, or rifles, and the whole 9 yards while he's facing heavy automatic fire. But Capers stays in the fight. Now, again, remember, he's critically wounded.
Right.
And when the corpsman came over to check on him initially, he was like, no, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. You take care of the other Marines. And even PFC Stanton, who wrote a witness statement, said, none of us realized how badly Capers was wounded until later on when they saw how badly he was tore up. So
he finally talk about a leader like we were talking about earlier, right? Take care of the others before yourself. But go ahead.
100%. And Capers, absolutely the selfless servant. And when he gets back to the LZ, that they recognize how badly tore up he is, and he's being bandaged, and all his Marines are kind of shocked because the way he got out, he was actually using his rifle as a crutch to walk out of the jungle after he had just suppressed the enemy. But as that's happening, the enemy eventually regroups and they decide to reattack. And so Capers pushes the corpsman off and he re-engages. And he re-engages with his rifle until he runs out of ammunition and then pulls out his pistol and starts taking them out. And those who were there, they were saying that he got at least 3 or 4 kills with a pistol. So that this was close contact. This was not some long-range engagement. He was fully engaged up close and personal. So eventually the enemy retreats again, and a couple of Marines have to come to get him back onto the helicopter, because at this point he can't even walk anymore because he had sustained 17 shrapnel wounds initially and then another 2 wounds while re-engaging. So 17 shrapnel wounds, 2 gunshot wounds, totally tore up, critically wounded. They escort him onto the helicopter. They board him up. But what ends up happening is as they're trying to take off, the helicopter's overloaded, that it's too heavy. They can't get off the ground. So Capers, again, selfless leader, he goes to jump off the helicopter and he's willing to sacrifice himself, realizing if he doesn't get out on this medevac bird, he's probably not going to survive. Right. And he knew that. And so he goes to jump off the helicopter, and he had to be physically restrained by the crew chief who held him into the helicopter as the bird bounced along. Eventually, it caught a big gust of wind, and the helicopter took off, and he made it back to Fubai and the hospital there. And all of his Marines survived, and they all credit him with being alive because of his selfless actions. And so this is where, when you look at these actions, and most people, if you were asked to assess someone for the Medal of Honor, how would you do that? You'd be like, oh my God, who gets the Medal of Honor? Like, you have to be unbelievable. Like, that has to go above and beyond, and you can't fathom it unless you say, well, let's do an assessment. Let's see other people who received the Medal of Honor at the same time for similar actions.
Right.
And when you do that and you compare Capers' actions to those similar Marines, again, who were deserving. I'm not taking away from any of these other Marines that received the Medal of Honor. And quite frankly, the Marine Corps is very skimpy when it comes to awarding medals. So if these Marines received the Medal of Honor, they deserve the Medal of Honor.
100%, right.
So now when you take Capers' actions and you compare them, and there was even this Lieutenant Graves, who was a Force Reconnaissance Platoon commander, just like Capers, very similar situation. They both got ambushed. Graves actually jumped off the helicopter and re-engaged. And then later, when he got back on a second medevac bird, his helicopter was shot down and he died. So the only difference between Capers' actions and this other lieutenant's actions, with fine nuances and all, was that this other Lieutenant Graves actually died. But that's not a requirement for the Medal of Honor. And you can look at multiple warriors, and this some people might find surprising. You don't even need to get wounded to receive the Medal of Honor. There are plenty of Marines who receive the Medal of Honor for heroic actions, and for whatever reason, they're able to dodge and avoid getting shot or blown up, but never received the Purple Heart, meaning they were never wounded in combat. So that's not the reason. And this is where, again, people keep trying to justify why Capers didn't get the Medal of Honor instead of making sure he does get the Medal of Honor.
Look at the actual action. Look at the story. Look what he did, right? And look at it. When his other Marines on your team are saying, "Hey, you deserve the Medal of Honor,"
and his entire chain of command,
and the general,
his entire
right? And the general
chain of
that
command.
he reported to that unfortunately, died in a helicopter accident. It's like, that should be enough information there, right? I don't know how much more information you need from that, but that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story, Bull. That's awesome.
Absolutely, brother.
So what's going on with the process? You got some letters up to some congressmen, and what's going on with it, and how can people help to get this moving forward?
That's a great question, and here's the thing: there's multiple parts to receiving the Medal of Honor, and we've kind of brought it up to this one phase. And the key pieces are that, number one, ideally you have the Commandant of the Marine Corps elevate this to the Secretary of the Navy, who elevates it to the Secretary of Defense, who elevates it to the President. Well, those recommendations aren't actually necessary. The command's recommendations and the commander's recommendations, like General Regner said, those are necessary, and we have those. So whether or not the Commandant of the Marine Corps supports this, that's not necessary. It's not mandatory. However, certainly it's helpful. And why is that helpful? Because many senators and congressmen will question, well, why isn't the Commandant of the Marine Corps supporting this? And they're going to be hesitant to push this through. And we'll talk about what Congress's role is in a moment, but it does raise a good question. And does the Commandant have to? Well, he doesn't. As a matter of fact, Secretary of Navy could go above him and say, yeah, we believe Capers deserves a Medal of Honor. The President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, he could come out and say, Capers deserves a Medal of Honor. So ideally, we'd love to have the Commandant on board, and he should be on board. There's no reason why he shouldn't. And quite frankly, I'm a little shocked that he hasn't jumped on board yet. So the next part is Congress. Why is Congress involved? Well, the
Right.
president actually awards the Medal of Honor on behalf of Congress. It's known as the Congressional Medal of Honor. With
Right.
that being said, as we mentioned earlier, that the award is supposed to be given within 5 years of the action. And so it's actually a good rule because it tries to make sure that there's some
All the
sense of
evidence and all.
urgency.
Right.
Exactly. However, if it goes beyond that 5 years, now all of a sudden it becomes this absolute nightmare because that's law, then Congress has to pass a law that means both the House and the Senate, they have to actually pass bills that has to get signed into law by the president of the United States.
Oh
Remember
my
that
gosh.
that show,
Wow.
I'm just a bill up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
well, this is what happens. The bill's sitting there, then it's got to go into committee, then it gets debated, and then politics gets involved, and all the rest of this. And that's the challenge.
Is that in
Is that
process now?
well, it is. We've been able to introduce a standalone bill. It's HR 3377, which is introduced. It has been introduced into the House, and it's being reviewed by committee, the House Armed Services Committee, and hopefully that will then go to the floor for a floor vote, and we'll have congressmen come out and vote on it one way or the other, and then it goes to the Senate, and it goes through the same process. And once that gets approved in both the House and the Senate, then it goes to the President of the United States. And so people are like, well, what is it the president just awarded the Medal of Honor? And we believe President Trump recognizes that Capers is deserving of the Medal of Honor. And I'm 100% confident that when given the opportunity to award him the Medal of Honor, he will award him the Medal of Honor. However, by law, he cannot until Congress passes this bill and gives it to him to sign off.
Wow.
So that's the challenge. Congress is this holding point. And again, that should be easy. But if you have Congress saying, well, why doesn't the Marine Corps support it? Well, now all of a sudden they're questioning whether this is the right thing because they don't want this to be political, and it shouldn't be. However, unfortunately, there are a lot of congressmen that have politicized this
Oh, that's not
award.
good. Okay.
So
yeah,
that's
we need to remember to go back to the action, right? It's like what you did, how you performed. That's all what really matters. But I get it. Unfortunately, sometimes people get wrapped up in politics. I'm not one of them. I just like doing the right thing, like you, Bull. So
no, you do all the time, Dave. I appreciate all your videos. They're awesome.
thank you, brother. Thank you. So what more can the public do, or policymakers, anyone listening to this, help you expedite this, right? Because Major James Capers Jr. is 87, 88, you said?
87. Yep.
So it would be awesome to be able to pin this on him before he passes away, right? So how can we help expedite this? Or, anybody that's involved, if they want to get involved more, what do we do to get this moving forward faster?
Well, first of all, I believe in willing things to happen. And that means you paint the vision of what must get done, and then you do everything in your power to facilitate that. You shape reality. And so in this situation, my vision that I think should be shared by all is that Capers receives the Medal of Honor and wears it as the guest of honor to the Commandant's 250th birthday ball, which is coming up here in November.
Wow, that would be incredible. I love that
And
vision.
that's what we must visualize.
That's
we must
powerful.
pray for, get some support. If God wills it, it's going to happen.
Right.
And so this is where anything that can be done to make this happen, and then the other piece is, God willing, Capers will stay alive that long. But this is where the focus of Everett, this is where this is all coming to this culmination right now. So what does that mean? If you're a general officer that's watching this, or a commission officer, or a staff NCO, or just some Marine that served for a couple of years that actually embodies the Marine Corps spirit, step up, contact the Commandant of the Marine Corps and ask him why he's not supporting the Medal of Honor for this deserving warrior. Secondly, reach out to your congressman, reach out to your senators, and let them know Major Capers deserves the Medal of Honor, and do not allow the bureaucrats to take this away from our warriors. And that's where the final piece is President Trump. Let him know that Major Capers deserves the Medal of Honor. And again, he's doing everything he can to attack the waste, fraud, abuse, and the bureaucratic morass within our armed forces, within the military, within the government. This is just a perfect example where it's an open and closed case. Major Capers deserves the Medal of Honor. He should be awarded the Medal of Honor, and you've got this just bureaucratic mess right in the middle that needs to be flushed out and made sure that Capers, who's deserving of the Medal of Honor, receives the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, I think that's a great vision. I love that vision that you painted there, and we know that President Trump has his plate full, right? But if there's any way that he could make this happen for that 250th, Marine Corps celebration, and have the Commandant pin it on him, and have President Trump be there, that would be extremely powerful for helping veterans, helping Major Capers, and most importantly, doing the right thing, like Bull was saying, right? Let's,
And what better way? We're talking about getting back to the warrior culture. Well, what better way to do that than recognizing one of the greatest warriors that's ever fought on behalf of the Marine Corps? And again, not taken away from others. He adds to that heritage, that lineage, like the incredible warrior ethos. And again, it's not, reckless, indiscriminate killing. Like, this is intentional. Again, it was a reaction to an ambush, so it was the intentional saving of lives, and he risked his life again and again. He withstood the initial attack, countered the attack, assaulted, and then withdrew after he was able to get his wounded Marines out first, and then while he's being treated, assaulted again, and then while being medevaced, was willing to sacrifice his own life,
wow,
so that his Marines would live.
That's amazing.
There's no question that he deserves a Medal of Honor, and it should happen.
Thanks for painting that picture, Bull. I think it's going to make it a big impression on a lot of people, for them to know the actual story and how it happened, why he deserves it. Forget all this scuttlebutt. Forget all these rumors that you're hearing out there, right? We're trained to do our mission no matter what. Sometimes we could be a little rough, right? But how many Marines out there that are Marines know this? Sometimes we're rough, unfortunately, right? But as we get older, I think we get a little bit softer and try to work around what we need to, but still we need to get the mission done. So even if you're softer or not, you still need to get the mission done. Bull, what's one thing that you want people to know about Major Capers that they may not know?
Well, look, he's an amazing individual, even beyond his service on the battlefield. He had a handicapped child. He did everything he could to support his child and his wife. Both of them passed away before him. So he's wrestling with a lot of challenges, the loss of his Marines, the loss of his wife, the loss of his child. And what's amazing is he was actually offered the Medal of Honor by some congressmen. And they said, look, this was during the whole BLM protests, riots, however you want to classify them, that they said, we're going to get you the Medal of Honor. However, you need to be an advocate, and you need to come out and you have to talk about the systemic racism in America and critical race theory, how white people are oppressors and black people are victims, and support this victim class of African Americans. And Capers, who'd been waiting for the Medal of Honor his whole life, said, I won't do that. And again, this speaks to his character. He did the right thing.
It doesn't stop. He did the right thing.
It speaks to his character. Wow. His integrity is impeccable.
Wow.
Every single time, and the reason that he could have just said,
"Yeah, let's do it.
I'll do whatever you want," and then not done it. Just he could have got what he wanted, but he didn't, because he knew he wouldn't. And why? Because they challenged him and said, well, you face systemic racism your whole life, and how can you not support this? And he was very clear. And he said, I was born in Jim Crow, South Carolina, the son of a sharecropper. I was picking cotton and tobacco as a child. And so I understand a systemically racist system, and I was a part of it. However, even in that challenging time when he was a young boy, that he got deathly ill, and a white family took him in and nursed him back to care, had them in his house for months, nursing him back to health. And so he can't tell you all white people are bad, especially when he knows for a fact that's not true. Even in the worst of the worst system and situation, he knew that wasn't true. So he
Right.
refused to say that story. And then later, when he decides to enlist in the Marine Corps, and it's interesting because I've had people say, oh, well, Capers didn't grow up in the South. He grew up in Maryland. He was a thug on the streets in Maryland. And they try to say that, some people try to detract from getting the Medal of Honor, like somehow that's a reason why he shouldn't.
Right.
Okay, just to be clear, his childhood, his background has nothing to do with his actions in Phu Loc. However, for those people who say, well, he grew up in Maryland, they're right. And here's the thing, both can actually be right, because later, when his father moved to Maryland, he ended up following his father. And so he was a teenager in Maryland. So again, both can be true. You don't have to have one and not the other. And again, none of that has anything to do with the Medal of Honor. But
Yeah,
again,
you got to be careful what stories you listen to, right? You got to do your own digging, just like anything else. You could turn on the TV, hear one story if you believe it. Yeah, I don't think you should do that. I think you should always do more research. So thank you.
Capers enlists in the Marine Corps, and there was no DEI, there were no quotas, and he says, he's like, hey, he said, come on and get your ass kicked like everybody else, and he did. And then he eventually wanted to go force reconnaissance, which is our elite warriors. And what's interesting is that, as he tells it, there were individual racists at the time in '67 who didn't want black Marines in the Marine Corps, didn't want black
especially
Marines
a recon Marine, right?
Right, didn't want him to go force. He was one of the first few black force reconnaissance Marines. However, as he points out, the system was on his side.
Nice.
So even though there were individuals, and as he says, there's always going to be individuals that don't like you for whatever reason, for your skin color, for your religion, for, they may not like you just because you're an asshole.
But everybody likes you though, right, Bull?
Yeah, no one. Hence the nickname. I tend to be a little bit more persistent than people like.
Okay.
So my dogs like me, and my wife tolerates me.
There you go.
So, and my kid likes me. God bless. So
that's awesome.
that being said, when you have this individual who goes force reconnaissance, and individuals said, we're not having you go. Force recon, you got to go scuba, and we're not putting you in the pool. We don't have a black guy drowning in the pool, not on my watch.
Right.
And the system, Marine Corps said, you either train him or you get out.
Nice.
And so he went to scuba school. And what happens? Well, not only does he graduate, but he's the honor graduate. Why? Because he's an amazing swimmer, because he'd been swimming his whole freaking life. Dispelled that myth. And so he goes on, leads Marines through all these combat missions. But he tells another great story about racism, that when he was put up and received a battlefield commission, and again, some have argued it was called something else. It wasn't called a battlefield commission. It was a staff NCO to officer, whatever. He was a staff sergeant. He ended up becoming a lieutenant, and he got promoted in the his field. Rank. Okay. He got promoted on the battlefield in Vietnam.
Okay.
So the point being is that when he got his bars, he was pinned on by his battalion commander, Colonel Weiler, and Ken Jordan, his company commander. He goes and looks in the mirror, and it was probably some cracked old shaving mirror or whatever. And he said, damn, I've never seen a black Marine Corps officer before. So even he was a little bit shocked. And so what does every good second lieutenant do? I'm heading to the club. And that's exactly what he did. So he goes to the officers club, which is probably some old dusty GP tent with like Christmas lights on the inside or something like that. And he walks in there, and sure enough, everybody stops and looks at him because he's the only black guy in the officers club. And Capers like, these sons of bitches, these racist bastards. Like, he was ready for a fight. He goes, just let one of these guys say something. And Capers, again, he was a fighter. He was known as the knife man. He was the guy that would go up and slit the sentry's throat. So he had no problem with actually engaging in hand-to-hand combat. And he was ready. And sure enough, as he tells it, as he says, some big white corn-fed Nebraska officer just comes walking over towards him. And Capers is like, well, this is going to be a big fight because the guy's two, three times my size. But Capers is like, I'm going to hurt him before he takes me out. And the guy comes over, puts his hand out, and says, welcome to the Officers Club. It's about time we have some real warriors in here.
Nice. That's awesome. I love it.
And so even Capers, he said to me, he goes, yeah, I guess I had to check my own racism at that time. Because he said, he goes, look, everybody was curious. Nobody understood. Nobody knew because nobody had seen a black Marine Corps officer before. But nobody had animosity towards him. And so he goes on and he serves. And now all of a sudden have him unwilling to fight this fight that he believes that anyone in America has an opportunity to succeed, regardless of whether or not someone likes you or dislikes you. And he believes telling individuals that they're victims simply because their skin color, he doesn't believe that's good for America. And he loves America. He loves the Marine Corps. He thinks the Marine Corps gave him everything in life. And so that offends certain lawmakers. And moreover, certain lawmakers don't want him being elevated to receive the Medal of Honor because they're concerned that if he gets the microphone and he starts telling his stories, these pro-America, pro-Marine Corps stories, and how the system was on his side, that's going to undermine their political narratives. And whether or not their narratives are correct or not, Capers says that wasn't his life's experience. And again, you can have two things that are both true, but Capers' story is an important story to tell. And so this is where you also have individuals, I don't know if you've heard this, some people don't like President Trump. Right. And some people, they actually think that he's a racist and a bigot. Right. And it's interesting. Certain people have said, there's no way that Capers is going to give, or that Trump is going to give Capers a Medal of Honor. There's no way he's going to give a black guy the Medal of Honor. Well, again, our perspective of history is really short because news cycles moving so quick. In 2018, President Trump actually awarded Sergeant Major Canley the Medal of Honor. And what's interesting about Sergeant Major Canley, he happened to be a Marine. He happened to serve in Vietnam and happened to be black. But the reason most people don't know about that is because the news cycle just didn't cover it. Legacy media, they didn't want that covered. And so it's the same thing. They don't want President Trump giving another black man an award as opposed to President Trump awarding a deserving Marine. Yeah. And that's the thing. This is 100% merit-based. This is where Capers is deserving regardless of the color of his skin. And then you have other people who are like, well, this is a DEI award. How's that DEI award? Well, he's black. And this is where people don't understand. DEI is not about saying nobody gets an award if you're black. No, right, exactly. It's saying if you deserve the award, you deserve the award. And so Capers could not be more deserving. And this is where you have all these politics and all these external issues coming into play. And as we were talking about previously, you had Ken Jordan, Capers' company commander, or he was technically the det officer in charge of this force reconnaissance det in Vietnam. And they said, well, this guy, one group says, this guy says Capers should never get the Medal of Honor. And it's actually what's written in a Coffee or Die article is apparently this one Marine, James Dixon, who was looking into Capers' situation, in a letter to a Pentagon official, we don't know who the official is, I haven't seen the letter, but James Dixon drafted 3 weeks before his own death, which again is kind of odd. Dixon described how Jordan, a retired colonel, had been adamant in his opposition for Capers receiving the Medal of Honor. And Dixon wrote, quote, or the quote from Dixon is, his exact words were, Not only no, but hell no,
Wow.
Dixon wrote. So what's interesting is I've heard other people say, look, his own company commander or his own officer in charge said, hell no, he doesn't deserve the Medal of Honor. And I've asked them, I said, did you hear Jordan say that? Like, well, no, but I heard that he said that. I said, okay. He may have said it. I have yet to find one person who actually heard him say that other than this individual Dixon who ended up dying. So again, we can't question what happened there. But what's interesting is, again, if you dig in, who is this guy Jordan? Because people have said, well, that's why Capers didn't get the Medal of Honor. This guy Jordan was a racist. And I have people who've come up and said, it's obvious. You know, Capers was black. This guy Jordan was white. So it's obvious. It was racism. Well, I don't know. I think I
I
need
don't
a
know how
little bit
obvious
more
that
than
is,
that.
but yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know a lot of black people, white people that happen to get along, although some people will deny that's true. And what's interesting is we actually found a document written by Jordan, signed by Jordan, with a notary public signature witnessing Jordan sign that. And I'll read just some excerpts of it because I think it's interesting because it dispels a lot of the myths about this guy, Ken Jordan, who supposedly said he would never recommend the Medal of Honor. So this is in Ken Jordan's words. I had the distinct honor to serve as the commanding officer for Major Capers from November 65 until March of 67. While he was a sergeant, while he was a staff sergeant, and second lieutenant. So let's just be clear. So this guy Jordan actually promoted him from sergeant to staff sergeant,
Oh,
was
there
going
you
to
go.
promote him from staff sergeant to gunnery sergeant, but instead Capers received a commission as a second lieutenant. The whole time, this guy Jordan is his commanding officer.
Wow.
Okay. From the commander's perspective, and particularly in combat, I feel that I know Jim Capers as well as anyone, as a leader and as an individual, and that my vantage point of his performance in combat is sound. In summary, okay, so now here, if this guy didn't like Capers, this summary is going to nail it. And it's going to talk about it. And it's going to expose this guy Jordan as a racist or a bigot. In summary, I strongly support a recommendation for the Congressional Medal of Honor for Major Jim Capers.
Wow.
This guy's the worst racist ever. Like, I'm like, he needs to get better at his racism.
And for our audience to know, Bull, when an officer is giving you an award or promoting you, right? They're working with you hand in hand. They know everything about you. They know your personality. You know, you and I have both received awards in the past, and people know you, right? So if you know, so whatever rumors were going around with Ken Jordan before, those are pretty much just busted right now, which is awesome.
And it gets better.
Oh my gosh.
This is another piece of the same document. He says, because he doubles down here, for one to realistically appreciate the courage and professionalism in combat of Jim Capers, they would have to accompany him on a patrol in combat. I have led several patrols with him, and I can vividly appreciate his courage and bravery under fire, as well as his concern for the safety of his Marines. He is a unique warrior.
Wow.
Again, and if that wasn't good enough, he actually drafted the initial Medal of Honor citation for Capers.
Is that something we could post, Bill?
Absolutely. I'll give you these
if you
documents.
could send me all these, I want to post these on the podcast so people could read them and see that.
Absolutely.
You know, talk about courage and what a mission, right?
Yep.
Hey, I got to ask you real quick too. You brought up Bull earlier, right? So what's that nickname? Where did you get that nickname? And obviously, I think it's from being successful, right? So I want to have you talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I don't know if it's from being successful. It's from being persistent. It doesn't mean that I always win the day, but I'm definitely going to put up the right fight. And it was nickname was given to me by General Byrne. when he was a major and I was serving as a second lieutenant down in Panama. And I was just very persistent in the way I thought we should be conducting ops. And he was trying to coax me into understanding a little bit of that term tact and how to work a little bit more effectively. He goes, but you're definitely the bull. And it was interesting because his definition of a bull is that a bull is not a predator, that a bull does not hunt down and kill just for the sake of killing.
Right.
He said, bulls fight when they are attacked or when they're defending others. He said, use that strength, use that power, make sure you're always defending others, most specifically your Marines. And throughout my career, I've definitely had a lot of challenges fighting for our junior Marines who deserve to be fought for, because these individuals, they put it all on the line. And if the whole concept of servant leadership is making sure that you're fighting the right fight. And so General Burnt unfortunately passed away, but his wife has asked me to carry on the legacy, keep the nickname.
Oh, wow.
And I have. And it's interesting that people, they'll attack me for whatever reason, and they love to say, well, bullshit. Like, that's okay. It doesn't bother me. It's, they project their own frailties, their own weaknesses, their own shortcomings onto me. That's okay. But what's interesting is that it's challenging, because for me, it forces me to recognize I can't quit in a fight. And it sort of reminds me of the concept of the Marine Corps a long time ago said that they were the greatest fighting force that had ever existed. And the rest of their existence, they now have to stand up and prove that every single day. So my perspective is that, I go up here, I try to fight for individuals best I can. I don't know that I've always won, but I sure as hell willing to put forward the best fight possible. And in this case with Capers, we're going to win, because it's the right thing to do for him. It's the right thing to do for the Marine Corps. It's the right thing to do for our nation. It's the right thing to do with regard to all those who served in Vietnam, that many of them have yet to receive the recognition they deserve. And quite frankly, it's recognizing the warrior ethos of the Marine Corps and of our armed forces, as opposed to focusing on anything less than that. So
that's incredible.
That's kind of my background.
That's incredible. Thank you, Bo. And I think you're helping a lot of war fighters, a lot of veterans in the past with your UAP organization, right? Before I forget, I've gotten to know you a little bit more over the year. I could definitely vouch for Bo. Great morals, great values, doing the right thing, right? So if anybody's saying the bull with the other part, it's not true. So he's the guy that's going to make it happen, and he'll take care of you. So remember that. But tell us about UAP, because without UAP and you, Bull, this wouldn't be being highlighted at all. So tell us about that, and tell us how people can support you with that as well, please.
I appreciate that. So UAP was actually founded by another recon Marine from Vietnam, who he saw these warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan being paraded through the streets, orange jumpsuits and shackles, the Hamdaniya Haditha Marines, and they were all accused of murdering individuals. And we even had Congressman Murtha coming out and saying that these individuals are murderers and had done all these horrific things. And the process had not worked yet. Nobody knew the full details. That it was this leap to this assumption that these Marines had done something wrong. And it was just such a political nightmare, slaughtering these individuals. And he said, these Marines are not going to get a fair shake unless they get the proper legal representation. And so he mortgaged his own home to found United American Patriots, to fund getting the lawyers necessary, civilian attorneys. And why is that so important? Because for most people, myself included, that we don't realize that the UCMJ is stacked against the individual. I served 25 years. I didn't realize it until much later when I reviewed these cases. And you have a system where the convening authority oversees a court martial and oversees the prosecution and the defense and selects the members who are going to be a part of the jury. And the jury doesn't have to be unanimous. All they need is 2/3 of jury to convict. So you've got a system that's totally stacked. And what's worse is if you're on the jury, and let's say, Dave, you and I are sitting here on the jury, and I'm a captain, you're lieutenant colonel, and I say, look, I don't think this guy's guilty. And you say, oh, really, captain? I'm questioning your judgment. Obviously, he's guilty. And if you don't think he's guilty, well, I don't think that I'm going to recommend you for command. As a matter of fact, I'm questioning your promotion. Doesn't seem like you've got your head on straight. So now, as a captain, I've got to come back and talk to my wife and say, hey, sweetheart, this guy's not guilty, but if I don't convict and if I don't say he's guilty, then, we may lose, the command, the house, the career. I mean, like our whole life might get shot based on this one decision.
Right.
And then if the warrior, that captain, goes back and says not guilty, then that lieutenant colonel, you're going to say, fine, you're done. I gave you a shot. You didn't listen to me. You're done. And guess what? We're still finding him guilty. So you just fired a round that had no impact. And now 2 guys are in essence dead.
Wow.
So it's a tough situation. And then to not have the proper representation. And I've got mountains of evidence of where our warriors who voluntarily support our rights, who go in harm's way on our behalf to ensure that we are protected as citizens, they don't get their rights protected. It's unbelievable how—
It's like we forget all about them after they're done fighting. It's like, hey, sorry.
That's true.
We're done with you. We don't need you anymore. Have a nice day, right?
That's true. And we don't recognize that they should have their rights paramount, just like ours, and they don't. So
your website is uap.org?
uap.org. This is where we fight for the rights of individuals. The cases I could tell you about are just shocking, where we've had our government fly in enemy combatants to testify against warriors while we were in combat, and then not just fly them back, but take them to SeaWorld to celebrate these convictions of our warriors, and then send them back as bomb makers back in their own country.
Wow. I love your organization, Bull. You're protecting the guys that protected us, right? And we're in for the fight, and you're fighting for them. It's incredible.
We've got two warriors right now that are still in prison, and their cases, there's definitely some challenges there. Their rights have certainly been violated, and if they were civilians, they'd be out because of that. But because they're in the military, they're still in Leavenworth. But what's really interesting to remember is that at the Doha Accords under President Trump, we released thousands of Taliban. Many of them were on death row for the most heinous crimes against mankind, including killing U.S. servicemen, women, children, all the rest. They've all been released. The war in Afghanistan's over. And yet, we still have 2 U.S. servicemen sitting in prison.
Wow.
Alvin Gibbs and Bob Bales. And, at a certain point, we have to recognize there's something wrong when we have these 2 warriors here. And we could definitely get into the details of both their cases, because what people know is simply the tip of the iceberg. But again, you show me where the Taliban were more deserving of being released, and there's no comparison. So those 2 warriors, we're still fighting for them to be released. And there's other cases, we can go into cases which UAP is not supporting, but just simply because we don't handle sex cases, we tend to focus on warriors. There's this gentleman, Anthony Santucci, young kid, joins the military. He's now in prison for raping a woman.
Wow.
Which, okay, great. He's a rapist, deserves to be in prison. All right. Let's look at the facts. He went to a bar, got picked up by a woman who drove him back to his barracks, went by the MPs getting on base, went back to his barracks room, had consensual sex with him. Before she left, kisses him goodbye, thanks him for the evening, and then drives back out past the MPs, leaving the base, and then later on realizes, oh my gosh, what if I'm pregnant? What if my husband and 4 children find out? All of a sudden, she cries rape, and this individual's in prison.
Wow.
Why is this? Because our system is so slanted against our military personnel. We
Talk
have
about
Senator
not being guilty before before trial, right? You're guilty right away. Yeah.
Exactly. It's absolutely the presumption of guilt is there. And when you have Senator Gillibrand, who's come out and changed the laws for the UCMJ, which are totally inconsistent with the way our Constitution's written, the accused has no rights anymore. They're not even allowed to have
Yeah.
impact witnesses come and talk about their character. Like it's totally they're responsible for proving that they did not commit rape, that's the antithesis of our whole due process system in America, where
Yeah.
you're supposed to prove that the government has the responsibility to prove a crime.
That
And
definitely
so
needs to be revised and taken a look at for sure. And can people just donate at uap.org, Bull, to the things that you guys are doing?
uap.org. Absolutely.
Perfect, perfect. We're about wrapped up. Anything that you want to add before we wrap up about Major Capers?
No, I think it's first of all, I appreciate all your time and getting on here and hopefully sharing the story, clearing up a lot of the misperceptions that are out there. And anybody who wants to get involved, certainly uap.org. If you go to Capers page, we've got a petition where people can sign there. Certainly donations are helpful to pay for all the administrative work that we're trying to do to make sure that the story gets out there. But again, reach out, contact the Commandant on the Marine Corps,
Oh, there you
contact
go.
your congressman, contact your senator, contact the President of the United States. Let's make this thing happen. And remember, 10 November 2025, this is the 250th anniversary of the Marine Corps. Capers should be wearing the Medal of Honor at the Commandant's birthday ball, and he should be the guest of honor. That's the vision. Let's hold it. Let's make it happen.
That'd be such a great honor. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Bull, and sharing your honest, insightful perspective about Major Capers and kind of opening it up so people know the real story behind them, right? If there's anything I could do to support in the future, please let me know. And may God bless you and your family and keep up the fight. For our audience tuning in, share, follow, and subscribe. These stories need to be heard. These lessons can change lives. Stay focused, stay winning. God bless you, and thank you for listening and following.
God bless.